How does the Gregorian leap year or leap day affect the Creator's calendar or his times? The first thing I want to advise is the word calendar is a man-made word, and whenever I see these man-made words, it kind of throws up a little yellow flag of caution, and I am just very cautious to diligently prove out all things and be sure that these constructs of men, these traditions of men, don't have the potential to undo the instructions of the Creator. But let's back up for a minute and talk about the history. So for a long time now, I'm going to only go back to the Julian calendar, but men have created these things called calendars for practical purposes, of course, to make sure people are on the same page and showing up for appointments on the same date and whatnot. But nonetheless, they created these concepts called calendars, and they have been, for a long time now, at least the Julian and the Gregorian calendar, have been trying to figure out a way to stay in sync with the seasons. And so the Julian calendar, after, I don't know, hundreds, maybe 1,000 years, realized the calendar was starting to slip from the seasonal cycle. And so that's when the Gregorian calendar was born. I think the Julian might have only been 365 days, but after so many years, they realized that the seasonal cycle was slipping like at least 11 days or close to 2 weeks or something. So that's when the Gregorian calendar was born, and they came up with a new calculation that seemed to be very closely in sync with the seasonal cycle, and that's where we came up with, there are a few rules for the leap day. I think, it's every 4 years, but then in addition to that, it can't be years that are divisible by 200 or something. So, they came up with this equation and this method for coming up with a calendar that stays in sync with the seasons. So that's what man has been trying to do, and there are many different ways to try and stay in sync with the seasons as you start to look into the Creator's calendar. There are some that just go with the leap years and the leap days, and there are others that go with leap months and leap weeks to try and keep their calendars in sync with the Creator's times. And the thing. So the next progression of this is what is this thing they're trying to keep in sync with? The seasons. Why do we have seasons? What creates the seasons? And I think if you remember your early education, you will remember that the sun causes the seasons, and it is the apparent movement of the sun in the sky. The sun bounces between the Tropic of Cancer and the Tropic of Capricorn, and that's what gives us the seasons. When the sun is at one of those extremes, you'll have summer if it's the extreme directly or more or less directly over your head, and when it hits the other tropic farthest away from you, that'll give you winter. And this is called the tropical year. It's the seasonal year, and the seasons are divided by these extreme inflection points of the sun, and it's really easy to see when the sun hits its extreme positions on the Tropic of Cancer and Capricorn, that when it hits those positions, those divide the seasons, and then the sun, when it crosses the celestial equator, also is a division of another set of seasons. And so the different stations of the sun are what give us the different divisions of the seasons, and I believe the different divisions of the year. When I read Genesis 1:14, it says He gave us those lights in the heavens, let them be for signs, for days, for seasons, and for years. And so if you get nothing else out of that verse, you need to realize, it said He gave them to us for years, for the concept of a year. So the seasonal cycle and the luminaries, they're gonna define a year for us. And, traffic accident. Sorry about that. Winter day here on the long commute to work, and there was an accident and detour. But anyway, I think I was saying so the Genesis 1:14 says the luminaries were given for. One of the main things it says is for years. So if nothing else out of that verse, zero in on that. We don't need to be trying to add or intercalate leap days, leap weeks, leap months to try and help the luminaries to establish the concept of a year. Like the Genesis 1:14 didn't say, I give you the luminaries plus some kind of calculation. So anyway, let's talk about the leap year, and let's talk about why it seems there's this thing called a leap year, this seeming need for adjustments. I don't believe this is necessary. We'll talk about that near the end. But anyway, it seems the Gregorian calendar has done a pretty good job of staying in sync with the seasons for like the past 400 years or something. So whatever this calculation is that the Gregorian calendar has come up with, it seems to have tried and true established that the seasonal year takes about 365.25-ish days to complete itself. That's the tropical year. That's the amount of time it takes for the sun, over the course of the year, the sun's moving north and south between the Tropic of Cancer and the Tropic of Capricorn. The creator, the scriptures say, the year begins in the spring, so that's when the sun is near the celestial equator. So the seasonal cycle is the amount of time, the seasonal year is the amount of time it takes for the sun to starting at the celestial equator, to go up to the northern tropic and then back down to the celestial equator, passing that, go down to the southern tropic, and then return to the celestial equator. And it's that north-south cycle of the sun that gives us the seasonal year, the solar months, and so what is this? It takes 365.25 days to complete that motion, the north and south motion. So think about a map. Try and visualize that. Let's say that this cycle is going to begin at the international date line. If you didn't know, the international date line is a man-made line that sits off the coast of Japan in the Pacific Ocean, and you can tell it's man-made because it's squiggly, and it's just certainly not the creator's international date line. But for practical purposes, I can understand why we need to do something like that. But you got to be careful to see what it can, what these types of assumptions and laws and traditions of men can do to the creator's instructions. So, but just imagine, take the international date line as a starting point, and let's walk through a year. So, day one, if we started at the international date line, we need a full revolution of the sun, whether you're flat Earth or round Earth, whatever, it doesn't matter. But one cycle of the sun, one revolution of the sun, one circuit of the sun, and that's one day. So then 2 days, 3 days, 4 days, 90 days, 180 days, 270 days. We're finally getting to 365 days, and the sun at the end of the 365th day has returned to the international date line. But now we need an extra 0.25 days for the seasonal cycle to complete itself. So the creator's international date line is going to need to jump. It's going to need to move. We need another 0.25 days before the next seasonal year, tropical year, begins. So if you can visualize it, the quote-unquote international dateline, it's going to need to shift. It's going to need to keep moving for another quarter of a day to get that extra 0.25. So you're going to go about a quarter of the map. So the new creator's international dateline would be somewhere, in Europe or something, wherever a quarter of the map is from that starting point. And once it reaches that point, that is the end of the seasonal year. And so, time is progressing and it's changing, and it's, I did a video recently about Daniel. I think it was like 217 maybe, but if you just search Daniel on my channel, recent video in the past few months, you'll find it. But it was talking about the verse in Daniel where he says, he changeth the times and the seasons, and I think that's what this is referring to. Like, it's this special design where it kind of perpetually keeps things in motion. Like, it keeps, I think it is literally set up so that people can't create quote-unquote calendars. Any number cycle that a man tries to set up and run with and not pay attention to the witness of the luminaries is going to eventually go out of sync with the luminaries. And, there, like I said, there are lots of different ways to intercalate. There's leap years, leap days, leap months, and leap weeks. But I think we simply need to watch for the signs. And I won't go into that now. I have many other videos talking about that. Again, I'd point you towards the Daniel video, and then also if a more in-depth discussion of the signs. I just released a video about a month ago talking about the luminary signs, sundials, and different things that other truth seekers, the signs that they think they've seen in these heavenly luminaries. But simply to answer the question of how the Gregorian calendar's leap day or leap year affect the times, if you have a calendar, it might look a little weird, and it might seem to be making months or years look longer than they should. But I think if you're watching for the signs, it doesn't matter. And I think the numbers will still work out, your counts will work out, but you've got to watch for the signs, and you've got to be just aware of how much time the sun and the moon and the stars need to be doing their special sign thing. There's a duration of time. I'm calling it the duration of a sign day, but it's a longer than a 24-hour period in order for everyone on Earth to see these signs. And so, I think the calendar counts can work, but if you try and make them work without a direct witness from the heavenly luminaries, then I think you're going to eventually fall out of sync with the seasons, and you're going to fall out of sync with the Creator's times. But if you're watching for the signs, I think the time begins as soon as you see the sign. And again, I do recommend watching my other videos. I think you'll see the straight line method if you've heard of that. I think you'll see that at the equator on the day of the last day of winter. So that would be the end of the old year, and the day following would be the spring equinox. And be careful, equinox is another one of those words that you don't see in the scriptures, just like calendar, just like Trinity, just like legalism. When you see these words that you don't see in the scriptures, it's just, you got to be a little careful, and you got to make sure you're digging deeper to understand truth. Prove all things, test all things, hold fast that which is good. But in a nutshell, I am a little concerned some of these other sundial methods, particularly the straight line. I've just always wondered if at different latitudes you might see it on a different day, because I've heard recently there was someone who was at the North Pole who said they were at the North Pole during an equinox event, and they saw the sun, 24-hour sun in the sky. So if you're collecting sundial data with a 24-hour sun, you're going to see a circle and not a straight line. So at some point that straight line pattern doesn't seem to hold true. I think it would hold true at the equator, but the trick again is the sun needs to be riding that celestial equator, and I think it might be doing something special. It might not just be crossing the equator, but might actually ride the celestial equator for a little bit of time. Let's see. And then there's another interesting it's very easy to confirm the other seasonal days, the solstices. You just see the sun or your shadow hidden in extreme position and return. It's a little tricky for the equinox, trying to determine the first day of the year, but I think we're getting very close. And the moon is potentially another big luminary sign. And I'm sitting on the edge of my seat to see what the moon does this year. Of course, I think the stars also can confirm. But definitely last year it seemed the moon was aligning with the sun to signify, I guess, the end and the beginning of the new year. If you know anything about the movement of the sun and the moon, say you're looking at the sunset, during the course of the year, you're going to see the sunrise. Let's say sunrise. Over the course of the year, you're going to see the sunrise. On the equinox, it's going to be like pretty much, it should be, if you were at the equator, you would see the sunrise due east. If you're not at the equator, it's not going to quite be due east. You're going to be there is going to be a slight angle from you to due east, I think. What was I going to say? I'm sorry. I forget. Right, the movement. So, but then on the solstice events, the longest and shortest days of the year, when the sun finally reaches the tropics of Cancer and Capricorn, you're going to see the sun rising in the east, but it's going to have a more north position or a more south position on the horizon. And it takes 180-ish days for the sun to bounce between those two extremes. And then, 365-ish days to complete the whole year cycle. But it takes 180 days for it to go one way from extreme to extreme. But the moon only takes 2 or 3 weeks to get from one extreme to the next. So it's pretty amazing if you're watching the moon on the rising or setting horizon. You just watch the moon rise, and every single day you can tell it's jumping on the horizon. The sun, the movement is so slight, it's hard to tell just looking at it. You need a tall sundial, I think, to verify the position of the sun accurately. But the moon moves so much, it's easy to tell where it was one day to the next. And so it moves so much faster in the north-south direction than the sun. It's really potentially quite an amazing sign if the moon does line up with the sun. And that's what appeared happened last spring, or they were really close to aligning. And like I said, check out my video. I was analyzing a video on another Truth Seekers channel. His name was the channel was Jerry Morris, but then that's the name of my video. I think it was Jerry Morris Moonset. But examine that. Look for the signs. If you look for the signs, when you see these signs, that's when time begins. And it does take some time for the signs to run their course for everyone on Earth to be able to see. And for more on that, I recommend you checking out some of my other videos. But as far as the leap year goes, I don't think that's gonna change anything for the creators' times, because they are dictated based off of the signs. Leap days are only going to matter if you're trying to make some kind of calculated counting calendar work. So I guess that's it for now. Shalom, and may Allah bless as you continually seek out His truth and love with a pure heart. I guess I forgot to bring things full circle, but when I was talking about how the international date line is jumping by that 0.25, 25% of the map, quarter of the map, because that's what we need for the seasonal cycle to complete itself. When that happens 4 years in a row, that roughly will land you back at the international date line, roughly. And so that's where the Gregorian calendar comes up with its leap day, because because the line is jumping. What I'll call the Creators International date line is jumping. Like, it takes 365.25-ish days for the seasonal cycle to complete itself every year, and so it does jump that extra quarter of a day every year, and in 4 years that adds up to the extra day, which if you started at the international date line will land you roughly near the international date line again. And so that's why every 4 years they add a leap year to kind of stay in sync with the seasons. But on that note, I recommend you check out another video I have that is titled Where Does Time Begin? I think Where and When Does Time Begin? And I discuss this more in depth. There's a short version. I recommend you check that one out. But I was looking in Stellarium to see this progression, and it doesn't look like it returns exactly to the same spot like the international date line every 4 years. So it's like literally constantly progressing slightly. So again, you can't quite put a handle on it, and I think the creator designed it that way intentionally, and it was so that we would have to obey Genesis 1:14 and simply watch for the luminary signs so that we may know his times because of the signs, and we would know when the years begin. And please stay tuned for more. It should be an interesting spring this year, and hopefully I'll stay tuned. I'll come out with some videos for what I plan to do to prep to try and confirm the luminary signs for this spring, and I hope you will get out and try to join this effort as well. Shalom, and may Allah bless as you continually seek out his truth and love with a pure heart.